There are prisons in America that exist quietly, rarely spoken about, hidden behind official language and distant geography. And then there are prisons like Holman Correctional Facility, places where power is not subtle, control is not temporary, and punishment is not just a sentence handed down by a judge, but a constant presence woven into everyday life. Holman Prison does not announce itself with chaos. It does not need to. Its authority is enforced through structure, repetition, and an atmosphere that leaves no room for uncertainty. From the moment an inmate enters this facility, every aspect of life is reduced to compliance. Where you stand, when you move, when you eat, when you speak, when you are allowed silence, and when silence is forced upon you. This is not a prison defined only by its walls or fences. It is defined by what happens inside the mind. Time slows down here. Days blur into identical routines. The outside world becomes distant, almost unreal, while the system inside grows heavier with every passing hour. Power at Holman is not loud, it is constant. It does not need to prove itself through spectacle. It proves itself through control that never stops. Located in rural Alabama, far from public view, Holman has become one of the most tightly controlled correctional facilities in the United States. It houses some of the state's most serious offenders, including death row inmates, and operates under conditions where security always comes first. But what makes Holman different isn't just who it holds, it's how it holds them. Inside these walls, punishment is not limited to confinement alone. It extends into routine, isolation, and psychological pressure. Inmates live under strict supervision, where every interaction is monitored, and every deviation from the rules carries consequences. Freedom is not taken away once. It is taken away repeatedly, every single day. For the men inside, survival is not about strength alone. It is about adaptation, learning when to speak and when to remain silent, learning how to exist within a system that was never designed to be forgiving. At Holman, power flows in one direction, and resistance rarely looks dramatic. More often, it looks like endurance, waking up, following orders, and finding ways to mentally withstand a system built to dominate every aspect of daily life. The environment itself reinforces this control. Concrete corridors, steel doors, narrow movement paths, and controlled sight lines all serve a purpose. Nothing here is accidental. Every design choice supports authority. Every schedule reinforces discipline. Every rule reminds inmates that control does not belong to them. Holman Prison also represents a larger truth about the American correctional system, a side rarely discussed in headlines. While public conversations often focus on sentencing and crime, far less attention is paid to what happens after the gates close. What daily life actually looks like. How long-term confinement shapes behavior, mental health, and identity. How punishment, when prolonged and absolute, transforms into something deeper than incarceration. For some inmates, Holman is a temporary stop. For others, it is the final place they will ever know. But for all who pass through it, the experience leaves a permanent mark. The structure of the prison becomes the structure of life. The rules become instinct. The constant awareness of authority reshapes how people think, move, and even breathe. This documentary is not about glorifying crime. It is not about sensational violence. It is about understanding power, how it is enforced, how it is maintained, and how it shapes human behavior behind bars. It is about control as a system, not a moment. And it is about punishment as a daily reality, not an abstract idea. Inside Holman Prison, punishment is not just a response to wrongdoing. It is a process, one that unfolds hour by hour, count by count, day by day. A process that tests the limits of patience, identity, and mental endurance. This is Holman Prison, Alabama, one of America's toughest prisons. A place where power defines reality, control governs every movement, and punishment does not end at the cell door. Before we begin, tap like, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us uncover the darkest corners of the prison system. Now let's step inside. Power inside Holman Prison does not begin with a confrontation. It does not arrive through shouting, force, or visible violence. Instead, it begins quietly, the moment the gate closes behind you. That sound, heavy and final, marks the end of personal autonomy and the beginning of total institutional control. For anyone entering Holman, The transition is immediate. There is no adjustment period where choices still exist. The system takes over instantly. Your identity is stripped down to classification numbers, housing assignments, and security risk levels. Every decision that once defined daily life, when to walk, when to eat, when to speak, when to rest, is transferred to the institution. Power here is not reactive. It is pre-established, absolute, and non-negotiable. From intake onward, the message is clear. This facility does not adapt to inmates. Inmates adapt to it. Rules are not flexible guidelines. They are rigid frameworks designed to eliminate unpredictability. Even the smallest action, like standing in the wrong place or moving at the wrong time, can be interpreted as defiance. And in a prison built around authority, defiance carries consequences. Holman's structure reinforces this dominance at every level. Movement is controlled through scheduled counts, escorts, and clearance procedures. Doors open only when permitted. Corridors exist not to connect people, but to regulate flow. Visibility is intentional. Officers can see without being seen, monitor without engaging, observe without explanation. This imbalance is not accidental. It is how power sustains itself. Inside maximum security housing, the pace of life is deliberately slow. Time is stretched, not wasted. Long hours inside confined spaces reduce stimulation, limit social interaction, and reinforce dependence on the system for even the most basic needs. Meals arrive when scheduled. Recreation happens only when authorized. Silence becomes routine, and routine becomes control. Authority at Holman is reinforced through predictability. The system does not rely on constant punishment. Instead, it relies on the possibility of punishment. Inmates know the rules are enforced consistently. That certainty shapes behavior more effectively than chaos ever could. When people understand that every action is observed and every violation is documented, compliance becomes survival. This structure affects how inmates think. Over time, decision-making narrows. Choices shrink. People stop asking, "What do I want to do?" and start asking, "What am I allowed to do?" That mental shift is one of the most powerful tools the institution possesses. Power does not just control bodies, it reshapes thought patterns. Hierarchy also plays a critical role. Authority flows downward, from administration to officers to inmates. There is no ambiguity about who holds power. Orders are given, not debated. Instructions are followed, not questioned. Even respect is regulated. Tone, posture, and eye contact all matter. A perceived lack of compliance can escalate quickly, not because of violence, but because control must be visibly maintained. At Holman, punishment is rarely dramatic. It is procedural: loss of privileges, restricted movement, increased isolation. These measures are not random. They are calculated responses designed to reinforce authority without destabilizing the system. The goal is not emotional reaction. It is behavioral correction through control. For inmates, learning the rules is not optional. It is essential. Survival depends on understanding how power operates, where boundaries exist, and when to remain invisible. Many adapt by minimizing attention, following routines precisely, and avoiding situations that draw scrutiny. In this environment, standing out is rarely beneficial. What makes Holman especially challenging is the psychological weight of this control. Long-term exposure to rigid authority can erode a sense of self. When every aspect of life is dictated by external rules, individuality becomes harder to maintain. The system does not demand obedience once. It demands it continuously, day after day, year after year. Power here is reinforced by repetition. Counts happen multiple times daily. Procedures never change. The predictability itself becomes exhausting. There is no variation to break the mental strain. Each day mirrors the last, reinforcing the reality that the system is permanent and resistance is costly. For correctional staff, maintaining this authority is considered essential to safety. Control prevents unpredictability. Structure prevents disorder. From an institutional perspective, power is not cruelty, it is management. But from inside the cell, that same structure can feel overwhelming, relentless, and inescapable. Holman is not unique in enforcing authority, but it is extreme in how consistently that authority defines daily existence. The prison operates as a closed system where power is embedded into architecture, scheduling, and procedure. It does not need to remind inmates who is in control. The environment itself does that. By the end of the first weeks inside Holman, most inmates understand a critical truth. Power here is not challenged head-on. It is navigated, endured, managed internally. Survival depends on learning how to exist within a system that was never designed to be humane, only effective. And once that reality sets in, the real punishment begins, not through force, but through time, repetition, and control that never loosens its grip. At Holman Correctional Facility, control is not enforced through constant confrontation. It is enforced through routine, a carefully engineered daily structure designed to remove unpredictability, limit personal choice, and condition behavior over time. Inside Holman, routine is not simply a schedule. It is the backbone of power. Every day begins the same way, not with an alarm clock, but with institutional movement. Lights, sounds, and officer presence signal the start of another identical cycle. Inmates do not wake up when they choose. They wake up when the system allows it. Even the act of standing up, dressing, or preparing for the day is shaped by rules that dictate what is permitted, what is restricted, and what must be done immediately. Counts are the foundation of daily control. Multiple times a day, inmates are required to be visible, accounted for, and compliant. These counts are not just about numbers. They are about reinforcing authority. Each count is a reminder that every person inside the facility is constantly monitored. Missing a count, moving incorrectly, or failing to comply does not go unnoticed. The system does not forget. Movement within Holman is highly regulated. Inmates cannot simply walk from one place to another. Every transfer, to meals, medical, recreation, or showers, happens under permission and supervision. Corridors are controlled spaces, not pathways of freedom. Timing matters. Positioning matters. Even posture can matter. The message is clear. Movement is a privilege, not a right. Meals are another tool of routine-based control. Food arrives on a schedule that rarely changes. Portions, timing, and duration are fixed. There is no flexibility, no choice, no negotiation. Eating becomes mechanical, a task completed under observation. The environment discourages conversation, relaxation, or enjoyment. Even nourishment is stripped of autonomy. Recreation, often viewed from the outside as a break from confinement, is tightly controlled as well. Access depends on behavior, staffing levels, and security conditions. Recreation time may be limited, delayed, or canceled altogether. When it does occur, it happens under supervision, within defined boundaries, and for strictly controlled periods. The system decides when relief is allowed and when it is withheld. Over time, this routine reshapes behavior. Inmates learn to anticipate the schedule rather than resist it. Life becomes about waiting. Waiting for doors to open, waiting for counts to clear, waiting for permission. The human mind adapts by lowering expectations. Hope shifts from long-term goals to short-term milestones. The next meal, the next movement, the next chance to step outside a cell. This constant repetition has psychological consequences. Days blur together. Weeks lose distinction. Without variation, time becomes abstract. For some, this creates numbness. For others, frustration. But for all, it reinforces dependency on the system. When routine controls everything, independence slowly erodes. Routine also reduces opportunities for conflict, a key goal of maximum security design. Predictability minimizes chaos. Inmates know where they are supposed to be and when. Officers rely on structure to maintain order. From an administrative perspective, routine equals safety. But from inside, that same structure can feel suffocating. The power of routine lies in its subtlety. There is no single moment where control feels overwhelming. Instead, it accumulates. Each restricted choice adds weight. Each repeated day reinforces the reality that nothing belongs to the individual anymore. Not time, not movement, not even silence. Even communication is shaped by routine. Access to phones, visitation, and correspondence follows strict rules. Missed windows cannot be recovered. Delays are common. Contact with the outside world becomes fragmented, unpredictable, and emotionally taxing. Relationships strain under the pressure of limited access and constant monitoring. For inmates serving long sentences, routine becomes life itself. The system does not need to threaten punishment constantly. The routine is the punishment. It limits identity, reduces spontaneity, and trains compliance through repetition. Resistance becomes exhausting. Acceptance becomes survival. Some inmates cope by mastering the routine, memorizing schedules, aligning behavior perfectly with expectations, avoiding attention. Others struggle, feeling trapped in a loop that never changes. But regardless of response, everyone inside Holman is shaped by the same daily structure. Routine also reinforces hierarchy. Officers control the pace of the day. Their decisions affect movement, access, and timing. Even when officers are not actively engaging, their authority is present through locked doors, surveillance, and procedural enforcement. Power does not require constant visibility to remain effective. What makes Holman's routine especially powerful is that it leaves little room for mental escape. There are no spontaneous moments, no unexpected breaks, no personal scheduling. Everything is anticipated. Everything is regulated. Over time, the mind adjusts by shrinking its sense of possibility. This is how control becomes normalized, not through force, but through structure that never loosens. The system does not ask inmates to comply once. It conditions them to comply continuously, day after day, year after year. By the time inmates fully understand how routine governs life inside Holman, it is already too late to separate themselves from it. The schedule has become instinct. The rules feel permanent. And control no longer needs to be enforced aggressively. It enforces itself. In Holman Prison, routine is not about efficiency. It is about dominance. It shapes behavior, suppresses resistance, and transforms punishment into a daily, inescapable reality. At Holman Correctional Facility, control does not rely on constant confrontation. It relies on separation. Isolation and surveillance form the silent architecture of power, shaping behavior long before discipline is ever imposed. The system does not need to raise its voice when it can reduce contact, limit stimulation, and observe everything. Isolation at Holman exists on multiple levels. There is physical isolation, long hours spent inside confined living spaces, limited movement, and restricted interaction. But more powerful is the psychological isolation, the gradual removal of meaningful human connection, spontaneity, and privacy. Over time, this separation alters how people think, respond, and cope. For many inmates, daily life involves extended periods alone. Conversation becomes scarce. Social bonds weaken. Even when others are nearby, interaction is regulated and monitored. Doors, barriers, and distance reduce communication to brief exchanges or none at all. The absence of normal social feedback creates an environment where thoughts echo without interruption. Surveillance reinforces this isolation. Cameras, controlled sightlines, and officer presence ensure that nothing inside the facility feels private. Inmates learn quickly that observation is constant, even when unseen. This awareness changes behavior. Movements become cautious. Speech becomes measured. Emotion is suppressed, not because it is forbidden, but because visibility makes vulnerability risky. The psychological effect of being watched continuously is profound. When people believe they are always observed, self-expression diminishes. Over time, inmates internalize the rules. They police themselves. This internalization is one of the most effective tools of control. The system does not need to intervene frequently because compliance becomes habitual. Isolation also distorts the perception of time. Without regular interaction or varied activity, days stretch unnaturally. Minutes feel longer. Weeks lose structure. The mind searches for stimulation and meaning, often turning inward. For some, this leads to numbness. For others, heightened anxiety. For many, both. At Holman, separation is not always framed as punishment. Often, it is described as security management. Certain housing assignments limit contact to reduce risk. Certain movement restrictions are justified as precautionary. But regardless of justification, the impact remains the same. Reduced human connection and increased psychological pressure. Extended isolation can erode emotional regulation. Small frustrations feel larger. Minor disruptions trigger stronger reactions. Without social grounding, thoughts can spiral unchecked. This is why isolation is considered one of the most psychologically demanding aspects of incarceration. It does not break people instantly, it wears them down gradually. Surveillance intensifies this effect. Knowing that reactions are observed discourages emotional release. Anger cannot be expressed safely. Sadness cannot be shared freely. Stress accumulates internally. Over time, emotional suppression becomes a survival strategy. But suppressed emotion does not disappear, it settles deeper. For inmates serving long sentences, the combination of isolation and surveillance reshapes identity. People begin to define themselves through the system's lens, classification levels, behavioral reports, compliance records. Personal history fades. The present becomes dominated by institutional evaluation rather than personal growth. The lack of privacy also affects thought itself. When every action is potentially observed, reflection becomes guarded. Even internal processing feels constrained. This constant self-monitoring is exhausting. It creates mental fatigue that does not resolve with rest. Some inmates attempt to cope by creating internal routines, reading, exercising in limited space, mental repetition. Others retreat emotionally, minimizing engagement to reduce stress. But coping does not eliminate the strain, it merely manages it. Isolation also alters social dynamics. When interaction is rare, it becomes valuable and risky at the same time. Trust is limited. Misunderstandings carry higher stakes. Relationships, when they form, are fragile and often shaped by circumstance rather than choice. From an institutional perspective, isolation and surveillance reduce unpredictability. Fewer interactions mean fewer conflicts. Observation ensures accountability. But from the inmate's perspective, these measures feel relentless. Control is not just enforced, it is embedded into consciousness. One of the most unsettling aspects of this environment is how normal it becomes. Over time, constant observation feels expected. Silence feels routine. Separation feels permanent. This normalization is itself a form of power. When extraordinary control becomes ordinary, resistance fades. Holman's design ensures that isolation is not an occasional condition. It is a foundational element. The prison does not rely on dramatic punishment to maintain order. It relies on quiet pressure, sustained over time, shaping behavior through psychological means. The human mind is adaptable, but it is not immune. Prolonged isolation and surveillance leave lasting effects. Even after leaving such environments, individuals may struggle with trust, decision-making, and emotional expression. The system's influence does not end at release. Inside Holman Prison, control operates beneath the surface. It is not always visible, but it is always present. Isolation narrows experience. Surveillance shapes behavior. Together, they create an environment where power is internalized and punishment becomes psychological as much as physical. By the time inmates recognize how deeply this system has shaped them, it has already succeeded. Control no longer needs to be imposed. It has become part of daily existence. At Holman Correctional Facility, punishment is not a rare event reserved for serious violations. It is a system, structured, procedural, and deeply embedded into everyday life. Unlike dramatic portrayals of prison discipline, what defines Holman is not chaos, but consistency. Punishment here is quiet, methodical, and designed to reinforce control without drawing attention to itself. Inside Holman, discipline does not begin with violence. It begins with documentation. Every action, every interaction, every deviation from routine can be recorded. Reports, write-ups, and classifications form the foundation of institutional punishment. This paper trail matters because it determines housing status, movement privileges, access to programs, and long-term conditions of confinement. Punishment is cumulative, not always immediate. This system creates a powerful psychological effect. Inmates understand that consequences may not come instantly, but they will come. A minor infraction today can influence conditions weeks or months later. This delayed accountability encourages constant self-monitoring. People begin to think not only about what they do, but how it might be interpreted by the system. Loss of privileges is one of the most common disciplinary tools. Access to recreation, commissary items, communication opportunities, or limited movement can be reduced or removed entirely. These losses may seem minor from the outside, but inside a highly controlled environment, they carry significant weight. When daily life already offers little freedom, the removal of even small privileges feels severe. Punishment also operates through restriction. Movement can be limited. Housing assignments can change. Interaction can be reduced. These measures are often framed as administrative decisions rather than penalties, but the impact is the same. The system tightens around the individual, reinforcing the reality that control is absolute. One of the most effective aspects of Holman's disciplinary structure is its predictability. Rules are enforced consistently. Consequences follow procedures. There is little ambiguity. This predictability discourages open resistance. Inmates quickly learn that challenging authority rarely produces immediate results and often worsens conditions. As a result, compliance becomes the safest option, not because inmates agree with the system, but because survival depends on minimizing exposure to punishment. Over time, behavior adjusts. People speak less, move carefully, follow routines precisely. The system does not need to force obedience loudly. It trains it quietly. Punishment at Holman also reinforces hierarchy. Authority is visible not only through officers, but through institutional processes. Decisions feel distant, impersonal, and difficult to appeal. This distance increases the sense of powerlessness. When consequences are delivered by the system rather than a single individual, resistance feels futile. This structure affects emotional expression. Anger becomes dangerous. Frustration becomes risky. Even legitimate complaints must be carefully managed. Inmates learn to suppress reactions, not because they no longer feel them, but because expression invites scrutiny. Emotional control becomes another survival skill. Over long periods, this constant suppression can be damaging. Stress accumulates internally. Without healthy outlets, tension builds. But the system is not designed to address emotional strain, only to manage behavior. Punishment corrects actions, not well-being. What makes Holman especially difficult is how punishment blends into routine. There is no clear boundary between normal conditions and disciplinary conditions. Life is already restrictive. Punishment simply intensifies that restriction. This blur makes it harder to mentally separate discipline from existence itself. For inmates serving extended sentences, punishment becomes less about correction and more about endurance. The question shifts from how do I avoid trouble to how do I last? Compliance becomes a long-term strategy, not a moral choice. From the institution's perspective, this system maintains order. Discipline reduces unpredictability. Consistency prevents escalation. But from inside, it feels relentless. There is no reset button. Past behavior follows you. Records define you. The system remembers everything. This creates a unique form of pressure. Even when behaving perfectly, inmates know they are one mistake away from harsher conditions. That awareness never fully disappears. It shapes posture, tone, and decision-making. Punishment does not need to happen frequently to remain effective. The possibility of punishment is enough. Over time, this environment can change how people view authority altogether. Trust erodes. Engagement decreases. Many withdraw mentally, focusing only on survival rather than growth. The system does not require hope, only compliance. Holman Prison's disciplinary structure reveals a deeper truth about power. Punishment does not need to be violent to be effective. It only needs to be consistent, unavoidable, and psychologically present. Control becomes internalized. Silence becomes safety. Endurance becomes identity. By the time inmates fully understand how punishment functions here, it has already done its work. Behavior is shaped. Resistance is minimized. Compliance is normalized. Inside Holman Prison, punishment is not an event. It is a condition. Inside Holman Correctional Facility, survival is not defined by strength alone. It is defined by adaptation. By learning how to exist within a system that controls time, movement, communication, and identity. For many inmates, the most difficult challenge is not physical confinement. It is preserving a sense of self in an environment designed to reduce individuality. From the earliest days inside Holman, inmates begin adjusting their behavior. Not dramatically, but subtly. Speech becomes measured. Movements become deliberate. Attention is avoided whenever possible. Survival often means learning how to blend into the background, to exist without standing out. In a place where scrutiny is constant, invisibility can feel like protection. Adaptation starts with routine. Inmates memorize schedules, anticipate counts, and align their actions precisely with expectations. Knowing when to be still is just as important as knowing when to move. Over time, this awareness becomes instinctive. The body reacts before the mind catches up. Compliance becomes automatic. Mental survival requires even greater effort. With limited stimulation and long stretches of isolation, the mind seeks structure wherever it can find it. Some inmates create internal routines, reading repeatedly, exercising in confined spaces, or setting personal mental schedules. These small acts of self-direction help restore a sense of control, even when actual autonomy is absent. Others turn inward, retreating emotionally to conserve energy. Engagement with the environment is reduced to the minimum necessary. This withdrawal is not apathy, it is self-preservation. In a system where emotional expression can attract unwanted attention, emotional restraint becomes a shield. Human connection, when it exists, is fragile. Trust is limited. Relationships are shaped by proximity and circumstance rather than choice. Misunderstandings carry high stakes, so communication is cautious. Many inmates learn to keep interactions brief and neutral, avoiding conflict not through confrontation, but through distance. One of the most profound struggles at Holman is maintaining identity. The system defines people through classifications, numbers, and behavior reports. Over time, personal history can feel irrelevant. Outside roles, parent, sibling, worker, fade into memory. The present becomes dominated by institutional labels rather than personal meaning. Some inmates fight this erosion quietly. They hold on to memories, beliefs, or personal goals. Letters from loved ones, when available, become lifelines. Personal reflection becomes an act of resistance, a way to remember that life once existed beyond these walls and may exist again. But not everyone adapts successfully. The psychological weight of long-term confinement, isolation, and control can be overwhelming. Frustration builds. Hope narrows. For some, the struggle is simply enduring each day without losing emotional stability. Survival becomes about lasting, not progressing. Time plays a central role in this struggle. Days inside Holman are repetitive, but the years are heavy. Long sentences stretch the future into an abstract concept. Planning becomes difficult when outcomes feel distant and uncertain. The mind learns to live in shorter increments, focusing on the next count, the next meal, the next small moment of relief. What makes adaptation especially complex is that the system rewards compliance, not growth. Good behavior may reduce hardship, but it rarely restores freedom. This reality forces inmates to recalibrate expectations. Success is measured not by achievement, but by stability, staying out of trouble, maintaining mental balance, and avoiding further restriction. Despite this, moments of humanity persist. Acts of kindness, however small, carry weight. Shared understanding passes silently between individuals navigating the same pressures. Even in a controlled environment, people find ways to recognize one another's presence, if only briefly. From the outside, these adaptations are invisible. Survival at Holman does not look dramatic. It looks quiet. It looks like patience. It looks like restraint. It looks like endurance carried out day after day without recognition. The system does not ask inmates to improve, only to comply. But survival often requires more than compliance. It requires resilience. The ability to absorb pressure without collapsing inward. The ability to adapt without forgetting who you were before the gate closed. By the time inmates reach this stage, they understand a difficult truth. Holman Prison does not just confine bodies, it reshapes lives. Survival is not about escaping the system physically, but about preserving a sense of self within it. Inside Holman, adaptation is unavoidable. Survival is continuous. And remaining human becomes the hardest challenge of all. When you're ready, say start final chapter/outro, and I'll conclude the documentary. Holman Prison is more than a correctional facility. It is a system built on structure, authority, and endurance. A place where power is exercised quietly, control is maintained through routine, and punishment extends far beyond the courtroom. Inside Holman Correctional Facility, confinement is not just physical. It is psychological. It reshapes time, behavior, and identity. What defines Holman is not constant chaos or spectacle. It is consistency, the repetition of rules, the certainty of surveillance, the knowledge that every movement is regulated and every choice is limited. Over time, This environment teaches compliance not through force, but through inevitability. Power becomes normal. Control becomes expected. Punishment becomes a condition of daily life. For the men inside, survival is rarely dramatic. It is quiet. It looks like adaptation, restraint, and endurance. It looks like learning how to exist within a system that was never designed to restore freedom, only to manage it. And for many, the most difficult battle is not with the institution itself, but with the slow erosion of self that comes from long-term confinement. Holman also reflects a broader reality about the American prison system. Long sentences, extreme control, and limited paths forward raise difficult questions about punishment, rehabilitation, and what society expects incarceration to accomplish. Behind the walls, these questions are not theoretical. They are lived every single day. Understanding places like Holman is not about excusing crime or condemning authority. It is about seeing the system as it operates when the doors close and the outside world fades away. It is about recognizing how power functions, how control is sustained, and how punishment shapes lives long after sentencing. Holman Prison stands as a reminder that incarceration is not just a legal outcome. It is a human experience, one defined by structure, endurance, and consequences that extend far beyond steel doors and concrete walls. Thanks for watching. Like, share, and subscribe.